The first handful of snow was a joke. The second was a declaration of war. It wasn't the cold that shocked Sarah, kneeling on the worn planks of her front porch, but the sheer, brutal malice packed into that frozen ball. It exploded against her temple, not with the playful thwump of a childhood snowball fight, but with the hard, stinging crack of ice deliberately formed at its core. The world blurred for a second, a kaleidoscope of leafless trees and the harsh, white sky. Her daughter, Chloe, buried her face deeper into Sarah's side, a tiny, trembling form in a bright yellow coat, her pink boots digging into the snow-dusted wood. Before Sarah could even process the pain, another volley came, not of snowballs now, but of snow kicked from heavy, work-booted feet. A cloud of powder and ice crystals assaulted them, stinging their eyes, filling their mouths with the taste of winter dirt and gasoline. This wasn't an accident. This was a targeted assault, and if you've ever felt that cold dread of being powerless, then you know exactly why Sarah's story is one you need to hear. Subscribe to Talscribe and witness the moment a single decision to torment a stranger summoned a storm of retribution unlike any other. They were just boys, really. 4 of them, swaggering in their blue and yellow letterman jackets, a proud, stylized R for Riverton High stitched over their hearts. They were the gods of the hallways, the kings of the Friday night football field, their identities so wholly wrapped up in that fabric that they believed it made them untouchable, even off campus. Their names were Kyle, the ringleader with a cruel twist to his smile, Jake, his hulking shadow, and twins, Mark and Mike, whose laughter was a constant, grating soundtrack to their cruelty. They'd piled into Jake's lifted truck, bored and looking for trouble, and their search had ended here, on this quiet, dead-end street, in front of this modest, slightly peeling wooden house. They saw a vulnerability they couldn't resist. A woman alone, a child, a perfect target for their misplaced sense of supremacy. Sarah Matthews was more than just a woman alone. She was a widow. The white dress she wore wasn't for the snow. It was a final, fragile tribute to the man she had buried just 3 days prior. David. His name was a ghost on the wind, a constant, aching echo in the silence of the house they were supposed to grow old in. He was a carpenter, a man whose hands could build anything, from a backyard treehouse for Chloe to the very porch she now knelt upon. A sudden, aggressive cancer had taken him, a thief in the night that stole their future and left Sarah and Chloe adrift in a sea of grief. The dress was her last act of public mourning, a promise she'd made to herself to wear white for a week, to honor the light he'd brought into her life, not the darkness of his departure. To the boys in the jackets, it was just a strange, flimsy dress, a symbol of her weakness. They had no idea it was a banner of a love so profound its absence had carved a canyon through her soul. "Look at her?" Kyle sneered, his breath pluming in the frigid air. "Think she's a ghost or something." He kicked another arc of snow, this one landing directly in Sarah's lap, the cold seeping through the thin fabric instantly. She flinched, her arms tightening around Chloe. "Please." Sarah's voice was a ragged whisper, torn from a throat raw with tears and the cold. "Just leave us alone. We've done nothing to you." "You're breathing our air," Jake rumbled, his voice like gravel. He was the biggest, a mountain of muscle and aggression. "This is our town. You and your kid, you don't belong here. This house should have been torn down years ago." It was a lie, of course. Sarah's family had lived in this house for 2 generations. But to these boys, anyone who wasn't part of their closed, self-congratulatory circle was an outsider, a blight to be removed. Mark and Mike chimed in, their voices a mocking chorus. "Yeah, why don't you pack up your little ghost girl and get out? This street would look better without this dump." Sarah's mind raced, a frantic, trapped animal looking for an escape. Her phone was inside. The neighbors were elderly, their houses set back from the road. No one would hear her if she screamed. Her car was blocked in the driveway by Jake's truck. They were completely, utterly isolated. She looked down at Chloe, whose small body was racked with silent sobs. The sight of her daughter's terror cut through her own fear, replacing it with a fierce, primal protectiveness. "Take my purse," she pleaded, her voice gaining a sliver of strength. "It's inside. Just take it and go." Kyle laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "We don't want your money, lady. We want you to understand." He took a step closer, his boot crunching on the frozen ground. "You don't belong. You're a stain. And we're here to clean you up." He reached down, not for her, but for Chloe, his fingers grasping for the hood of her yellow coat. That was the line. The uncrossable boundary. A sound ripped from Sarah's throat, a guttural, raw cry of pure maternal defiance. "Don't you touch her!" She surged to her feet, placing her own body like a shield between Kyle and her daughter. For a moment, the boys were startled by the sudden ferocity. Then, Jake's face hardened. He stepped forward and shoved her hard. Sarah stumbled back, her legs buckling, and she fell against the front door with a sickening thud, slumping back down to the porch, dazed. The world narrowed to a pinprick. Chloe's scream, high and piercing, cut through the cold air. The boys loomed over them, their laughter returning, louder now, emboldened by their act of violence. They began kicking more snow, not just powdery fluff, but the heavy, wet, icy sludge from the edge of the lawn, pelting mother and daughter, reveling in their domination. This was the climax of their cruelty, the moment they felt most powerful. They were so consumed by their petty tyranny that they failed to notice the world around them shifting. They didn't see the curtain twitch in the house next door, a house that had been still and quiet, just like all the others on the street. The house next door belonged to Marcus Thorne, and Marcus Thorne was a Navy SEAL. He wasn't just a veteran, he was active duty, home on a brief 72-hour leave between deployments. He'd been trying to sleep, his body still aching from the physical and mental toll of his last mission in a dusty, sun-scorched country halfway across the globe. The sound of raised, angry voices had initially been a nuisance, a background noise he'd tried to filter out. But then came the scream, a child's scream. It was a sound that bypassed all his training, all his fatigue, and went straight to the core of him. It was a sound he'd heard in war zones, a sound that always signaled the absolute worst of humanity. He was at the window in 2 strides. The scene that unfolded on his neighbor's porch was one of such stark, domestic evil that it took his brain a half-second to reconcile it with the quiet American street he knew. 4 large males, a woman in a white dress, crumpled and defenseless, a small child terrified, and the body language, the aggressive postures, the casual violence of the kicked snow. It was an unmistakable picture of a brutal, cowardly assault. A coldness settled over Marcus, a familiar and terrifying calm. This was no longer his quiet neighborhood. This was a battlefield, and an unacceptable threat had presented itself. He didn't run to his gun safe. He didn't call 911. The calculus of the situation was instantaneous. The threat was imminent. The response needed to be immediate and overwhelming. He moved to his back door, where a sleek, black shape uncoiled itself from a bed in the mudroom. Rex, his K9 partner. A 90-pound German shepherd with intelligent, amber eyes and a loyalty that was absolute. Rex wasn't a pet, he was a weapon, a sensor, a brother. He read the change in Marcus's posture, the tension in the air, and was on his feet in an instant, a low, questioning whine in his throat. "Heel," Marcus commanded, his voice low and flat. The word was not a request, it was a trigger. Rex fell into position at his left side, his body taut, his focus sharpening to a razor's edge. Together, man and dog, they moved through the house and out the side door into the biting cold. They didn't go through the front gate. They moved with a predator's silence along the property line, using the sparse, snow-laden bushes for cover. The bullies were so focused on their victims, so lost in their pathetic display of power, that they had no idea death was stalking them just feet away. Marcus took in the scene with a sniper's eye. The woman, Sarah, he remembered her name from a brief wave months ago, was trying to shield her daughter, taking the brunt of the assault. The lead bully, the one with the cocky smirk, was reaching for the child again. The time for observation was over. "Hey," but the word wasn't shouted. It was delivered with a quiet, conversational force that cut through the laughter and the child's cries like a blade. It was so utterly unexpected, so calm and yet so utterly dangerous, that all 4 boys froze mid-action, their heads snapping toward the source of the sound. Marcus Thorne stepped out from the side of the house. He wasn't in a winter coat. He was wearing his Desert Marpak camouflage pants and a tight, fitting black T-shirt despite the cold. The clothes did little to conceal the powerful, ropey muscle forged in endless hours of brutal training. His posture was relaxed, but it was the relaxation of a coiled spring. His eyes, a flinty gray, scanned the 4 of them, assessing, categorizing, threat ranking, and beside him Rex stood, a statue of black fur and focused intent. The dog's lips were slightly curled, not in a snarl, but in a silent warning, revealing a glimpse of teeth that looked like polished ivory. His eyes were locked on the group, waiting for a single command. The bully's confidence, so solid moments before, shattered like glass. The dynamic of the entire situation had been inverted in a single, silent second. They were no longer the predators. They were the prey. Kyle, trying desperately to reclaim the dominance he'd felt, puffed out his chest. "This is none of your business, old man. Walk away." The bravado in his voice was thin, brittle. Marcus didn't even look at him. His eyes were on Jake, the biggest one, identifying him as the primary physical threat. "You have 5 seconds to get off this property," Marcus said, his voice still terrifyingly even. "The clock started when I arrived." Jake, emboldened by his size and a lifetime of using it to intimidate, took a threatening step forward. "Or what? You and your dog gonna do something about it?" That was the mistake. Marcus didn't answer. He didn't need to. He simply gave a hand signal, a subtle, almost imperceptible flick of his fingers. Rex exploded into motion. It wasn't a run, it was a launch. A black blur of pure, condensed power crossing the 20-foot distance in a heartbeat. He didn't bark. He didn't growl. The only sound was the pounding of his paws on the frozen earth and the terrifying, guttural roar that erupted from his chest as he leaped. He didn't aim for Jake's throat. That would have been lethal. He aimed for the arm that was rising in a defensive gesture. Rex's jaws closed around Jake's thick jacket sleeve with a sound like a car door slamming shut. The force of the impact was immense, spinning the large boy completely around and sending him crashing to the ground, screaming in shock and pain. Rex held fast, his body a tense, immovable weight, his eyes glaring up at the terrified boy, a low, continuous growl rumbling like an idling engine. It was a controlled takedown, a message written in pain and absolute submission. The reaction from the other 3 was instantaneous and pathetic. The twins, Mark and Mike, stood frozen, their faces masks of sheer, unadulterated terror, urine darkening the legs of their jeans. Kyle, the ringleader, took a stumbling step back, his bravado completely gone, replaced by the wide-eyed fear of a child. Marcus walked forward, his movements economical and precise. He stopped in front of Kyle. "I believe I gave you an order," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper that was somehow more frightening than a shout. "You have 2 options. You can carry your friend to that truck and leave, or I can give my friend another command. He hasn't had his dinner yet. Your choice." Kyle couldn't even speak. He just nodded, a frantic, jerky motion. He and the terrified twins scrambled to where Jake was still pinned, whimpering on the ground. "Let him up," Marcus commanded. Rex immediately released his grip, stepping back but keeping his body low, his gaze fixed on Jake, a clear promise of what would happen if he moved. The 3 boys dragged a sobbing Jake to his feet and dragged him to the truck. They fumbled with the doors, tumbling inside. The engine roared to life, and the truck peeled away, its tires spinning wildly on the slick pavement, disappearing down the street in a cloud of exhaust fumes. The sudden silence that fell over the yard was profound. The only sounds were the whisper of the wind in the pines and Chloe's quiet, hiccuping sobs. Marcus turned his back on the retreating threat, his focus immediately shifting to the 2 victims on the porch. The warrior's mask fell away, replaced by an expression of deep concern. He approached slowly, his hands held out to his sides, non-threatening. "Mom," he said, his voice now soft, gentle. "My name is Marcus. I live next door. Are you okay? Is your daughter hurt?" Sarah looked up at him, her eyes wide, swimming with a mixture of shock, residual terror, and overwhelming relief. She couldn't form words. She just shook her head, clutching Chloe tighter. Rex, his job done, trotted over to them. He didn't approach aggressively. He lowered his head and gave a soft, questioning woof, nuzzling Sarah's hand with his cold, wet nose. It was an incredible transformation. The living weapon was now a source of comfort. Marcus knelt a few feet away, giving them space. "It's over," he said, his voice firm, leaving no room for doubt. "They won't be back. I promise you that." He looked at Chloe, who was peeking out from her mother's arms, her eyes fixed on the big, black dog. Marcus gave a small, reassuring smile. "It's okay. His name is Rex. He's a good guy. He likes kids." Tentatively, Chloe reached out a small, mittened hand. Rex, sensing her fear, leaned forward and gently licked her mitten. A tiny hiccuping giggle escaped her lips. It was the most beautiful sound Sarah had heard in weeks. The police arrived 10 minutes later, called by one of the elderly neighbors who had finally seen the commotion. Marcus gave his statement with calm, military precision, describing the assault. He provided the make, model, and license plate of the truck. The officers, recognizing the letterman jackets, knew exactly who they were dealing with. They took Sarah's statement, their faces growing grim, as she recounted the events leading up to the attack, her voice trembling as she explained why she was wearing the white dress. The fallout was swift and absolute. The boys, shaken to their core and facing serious charges of assault, harassment, and threatening a minor, confessed immediately. Their parents, some of them prominent in the small town, were horrified. The R on their jackets, once a symbol of pride, became a mark of shame. They were expelled from school, their athletic scholarships revoked. Their futures irrevocably altered by a single, cruel choice on a snowy afternoon. But this story isn't about their punishment. It's about what was saved. In the days that followed, Marcus checked on Sarah and Chloe daily. He fixed a loose step on their porch. He shoveled their walk without being asked. He was a quiet, solid presence in the swirling chaos of their grief. He and Sarah would talk slowly at first, then more deeply. She learned about David. He learned about the brotherhood Marcus had lost and found in the teams. A fragile, healing bond began to form, built on a foundation of shared respect and a traumatic event that had, paradoxically, brought light into the darkness. Weeks later, the first thaw came. Patches of brown grass emerged from the snow. Sarah was in the kitchen, making hot chocolate, when she heard peals of laughter from the backyard. She looked out the window. Chloe, in her yellow coat and pink boots, was running through the slushy grass, her arms outstretched. Chasing her with a playful, loping gait was Rex. And watching them both, leaning against the fence with a small, quiet smile on his face, was Marcus. The sight struck Sarah with the force of a physical blow. It wasn't the dramatic rescue, the terrifying efficiency of the takedown that finally broke her. It was this simple, quiet moment of normalcy, of joy, of protection. It was the sight of her daughter laughing, truly laughing, for the first time since her father had died. The dam of her grief finally burst, but the tears that came were not just of sorrow, but of a profound, aching gratitude. The long, cold winter wasn't over, but the first, fragile green shoots of a new beginning were pushing their way through the frozen earth. The widow in the white dress had found her color again, and the little girl in the yellow coat had found her smile, all because a warrior and his loyal K9 happened to live next door. A silent, watchful promise that even in the darkest of times, there are still those who will stand against the storm. This story of a quiet street, a moment of profound cruelty, and an even more profound act of protection, it's one I feel connects with the very soul of this country. It makes me wonder, from which part of the country are you watching this video? Let me know in the comments. I read every single one.